Barad-dûr, the fortress of Sauron, stood proudly upon its mountainside throne overlooking the plateau of Gorgoroth in the land of Mordor. Its foundations, strengthened by the power of the One Ring, were unbreakable. Its walls, as black as nightfall, were crowned with battlement upon battlement. Its gates yawned wide, forged of steel and adamant, and above it all reared a black tower, high and dreadful. Yet one might wonder, why did Sauron require a stronghold of such monstrous scale, and what dark secrets did it harbour? Today we will peer behind the black walls of Barad-dûr and discover exactly what Tolkien revealed regarding the inner workings of Sauron's seat of power. So join me as we pass through shadow and stone and unravel the secrets of Barad-dûr. Following the downfall of Morgoth in the War of Wrath, Sauron, his chief lieutenant, roamed the lands in exile, bereft of purpose. Yet with the passing of a full millennia, around the year 1000 of the Second Age, he claimed the land of Mordor as his own. There upon the darkened slopes of the Ash Mountains and nigh unto Orodruin, which men would later name Mount Doom, he began to raise a mighty fortress, the construction of which would not be complete for around 200 years. Then another 400 years would pass before he wrought the One Ring within the burning heart of Mount Doom, pouring into it much of his own power. With its forging complete, he fortified the foundations of Barad-dûr with the strength of the ring, binding his seat of power to the fate of the One. The Dark Tower was broken, but its foundations were not removed, for they were made with the power of the ring, and while it remains, they will endure. In the years that followed, Sauron gathered his strength in Middle-earth. His dominion stretched not only far into the lands of the east, but also into much of the west. However, in the year 3261 of the Second Age, Ar-Pharazôn, king of Númenor, set sail with a great armament and came ashore at the havens of Umbar. From there, he marched north in majesty toward Mordor. So great was the splendour of his host that Sauron donned a fair form and came forth in humility and yielded himself before the Golden King. Thus he was taken as hostage to Númenor. What unfolded in Mordor and within Barad-dûr in those days is not fully revealed. Yet it is likely that the Nine, the Ringwraiths, took upon themselves the rule of the Dark Tower until their master should return. When at last Númenor fell into ruin and was swallowed by the sea, Sauron's spirit, though disembodied, escaped the wreckage and returned once more to Barad-dûr. There, amid the fire and gloom of his dark stronghold, he shaped for himself a new and terrible form, in which he would remain ever after. Over 100 years later, in the year 3430 of the Second Age, Elendil and Gil-galad forged a last alliance of men and elves, and together they marched against Sauron and laid siege to Barad-dûr. The siege endured for 7 long years, for the fortress of Sauron was vast and wrought with dark enchantments. Yet at last Sauron himself was forced to come forth and do battle, and he was cast down in combat. Then Isildur, son of Elendil, took up his father's broken sword and cut the One Ring from the hand of the fallen Dark Lord. He kept it for himself as Wergild, and would not destroy it. The servants of Sauron were routed and dispersed, yet they were not wholly destroyed. And though many men turned now from evil and became subject to the heirs of Elendil, yet many more remembered Sauron in their hearts and hated the kingdoms of the West. The Dark Tower was levelled to the ground, yet its foundations remained, and it was not forgotten. The Dark Tower was cast down at last, yet its foundations, wrought with the power of the One Ring, remained unbroken. When Sauron returned to the West in the year 1050 of the Third Age, he returned in secret and raised a shadowy stronghold in Greenwood the Great, which men would come to call Dol Guldur, and there he hid under the guise of the Necromancer. Long did his presence remain hidden, until Gandalf uncovered the truth, for he ventured alone into the halls of Dol Guldur, confirming his suspicions that the Necromancer was in fact Sauron returned. In the year 2941, the White Council finally decided to assail Dol Guldur. Yet Sauron, ever cunning and far-sighted, had foreseen their coming. Thus, abandoning Dol Guldur, he fled the assault and returned once more to the land of Mordor, where the Nazgûl had been preparing for his return. There he began the rebuilding of Barad-dûr, upon the same foundations that had laid waiting for 1,000 years. Thus Barad-dûr arose for a second time, and from that seat he waged his war upon Middle-earth, seeking ever to bring all peoples beneath his dominion. It is tempting to conjure an image of Barad-dûr as a dread citadel teeming with orcs, trolls, and other twisted creatures of shadow. Yet in truth, it is far more likely that the Dark Tower was manned in large part by the race of men. Sauron, in his dark wisdom, did not place his deepest trust in orcs, but in men, those more capable and ambitious of heart. His most exalted servants, the Nazgûl and the Mouth of Sauron, were of course men. It stands to reason then that he would entrust the works of craft and skill not to orc kind, but to men. Blacksmiths, masons, and artificers, those who shaped iron and stone, were better chosen from amongst the tribes of men whose skillful hands were suited to such labours. Orcs, brutish and base, were more fit for toil that required neither thought nor care. Garrisons, sentries, and foot soldiers, driven by fear and fury rather than true loyalty. And in the far reaches of Mordor's southern lands, it was not orcs who brought forth the harvest. There it was men who tilled the earth, sowing grain and gathering provisions to feed his vast hosts. "We don't like the look of things at all," said Sam. "Pretty hopeless, I call it. Saving that where there's such a lot of folk there must be wells or water, not to mention food. And these are men, not orcs, or my eyes are all wrong." Neither he nor Frodo knew anything of the great slave-worked fields away to the south in this wide realm, beyond the fumes of the mountain by the dark, sad waters of Lake Nirnan, nor of the great roads that ran away east and south to tributary lands, from which the soldiers of the tower brought long wagon trains of goods and booty and fresh slaves. It is most likely that Barad-dûr was peopled by a mix of men and orcs. These thralls served the Dark Lord in myriad ways, from lowly labourers to cruel overseers, yet amongst them it would have been the race of men who often held sway in higher stations, those of rank, craft and cunning. Foremost among these mortal servants stood the Mouth of Sauron, a man learned in sorcery. He bore the title of Lieutenant of the Tower, and it was within the black walls of Barad-dûr that he dwelt, a herald of dread and cruelty. The Lieutenant of the Tower of Barad-dûr he was, and his name is remembered in no tale, for he himself had forgotten it. And he said, "I am the Mouth of Sauron," but it is told that he was a renegade, who came from the race of those that are named the Black Númenóreans, for they established their dwellings in Middle-earth during the years of Sauron's domination, and they worshipped him, being enamoured of evil knowledge. And he entered the service of the Dark Tower when it first rose again, and because of his cunning, he grew ever higher in the Lord's favour, and he learned great sorcery, and he knew much of the mind of Sauron, and he was more cruel than any orc. The Mouth of Sauron was counted among the Black Númenóreans, and it seems plausible that he was not the only one of his kind in Barad-dûr. Sauron held a particular fondness for the corrupted sons of Númenor, and it pleased him greatly to see the heirs of the Edain, whose ancestors had once fought against Morgoth in the First Age, now bent to his will in the Third. Thus it stood to reason that Barad-dûr harboured more of these Black Númenórean men, who may have served as fell sorcerers, whispering scribes, emissaries cloaked in shadow, and lawmasters who clung to the remnants of forgotten knowledge. Even amongst the 9 Nazgûl, it is said that 3 hailed from Númenórean stock, and the Ringwraiths too would surely have come to dwell in Barad-dûr at various times, remaining within its blackened halls for extended periods over the long centuries of their lives. Yet what chambers or resting places might have served such wraiths remains a mystery. Being neither living nor dead, it is doubtful that they required mortal comfort. Perhaps they lingered in the cold shadows of the citadel, gliding soundlessly through its echoing ways, like a bitter wind drifting through a shadowed crypt. Although the terror that went before them was such that it stifled the hearts of the living, and even in a stronghold such as Barad-dûr, their presence would have been a blight upon the spirits of men and orcs. The Lord of Morgul therefore led his companions over Anduin, unclad and unmounted, and invisible to eyes, and yet a terror to all living things that they passed near. It was maybe on the first day of July that they went forth. They passed slowly and in stealth through Anorian, and over the Entwade, and so into the Wold, and rumour of darkness and a dread of men knew not what went before them. Due to this dread aura, it was conceivable that the Nazgul would need to be kept away from the city, lest their presence plague the minds and thus hinder the efforts of those who dwelt and toiled within. Or, if they did dwell within Barad-dûr, it may have been that they had to be housed in the heights of the Dark Tower itself, away from those below and nearer to Sauron, where the sense of fear was already at its thickest. Thus Barad-dûr was a place where the living served under constant threat of the shadow that loomed above them, and although many souls served within Barad-dûr, all worked together towards a single goal and moved as one with the will of the Dark Lord. One of the more revealing passages regarding Barad-dûr comes when Tolkien speaks not of the Blackland itself, but of Saruman's corruption of Isengard. Saruman, in pride and secret envy, sought to make Isengard the rival of Barad-dûr, and in the mirror of his malevolence we discover a reflection of Barad-dûr. A strong place and wonderful was Isengard, but Saruman had slowly shaped it to his shifting purposes, and made it better, as he thought, being deceived, for all those arts and subtle devices for which he forsook his former wisdom, and which fondly he imagined were his own, came but from Mordor, so that what he made was naught, only a little copy, a child's model, or a slave's flattery of that vast fortress, armoury, prison, furnace of great power, Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, which suffered no rival and laughed at flattery, biding its time, secure in its pride and its immeasurable strength. Through Tolkien's words regarding Saruman's mimicry, a tangible description of the shadowed inner workings of Barad-dûr is finally revealed to us. Barad-dûr is described as a furnace of great power and an armoury, suggesting that it was not merely a citadel of stone and shadow, but a vast engine of industry where articles of war were wrought. One could well imagine a vision of ceaseless labour, rivers of molten metal flowing like blood through iron channels, the clash and clatter of hammers echoing through the gloom. And we know too that Barad-dûr held dungeons within its blackened heart, deep and terrible. For after the ring was unmade, Frodo beheld a fleeting vision of the Dark Tower in its moment of ruin. A brief vision he had of swirling cloud, and in the midst of it, towers and battlements, tall as hills, founded upon a mighty mountain throne above immeasurable pits. Great courts and dungeons, eyeless prisons sheer as cliffs, and gaping gates of steel and adamant. In this passage, the dungeons of Sauron are spoken of as eyeless prisons, a phrase that conjures visions of a place of utter darkness, where no gaze could pierce the gloom, a place of isolation and despair, designed to break the wills of any ill-fated enough to find themselves imprisoned within. In contrast, mentioned also were the great courts of Sauron. These would have been vast halls that stood as monuments to Sauron's pride, likely built to host solemn gatherings, councils of fear, and dark rites performed in dreadful ceremonies beneath their vaulted ceilings. Here, lords of men who had bent the knee would have stood in reverence to Sauron, surrounded by gloom and grandeur alike. Their vastness and form would have been designed to overwhelm, inspire awe, and instill dread, declaring to all who entered that they stood before a power greater than themselves. Yet it was not in these echoing halls that Sauron made his dwelling. His favoured chamber lay high above, within the pinnacle of the Black Tower. From that dreadful height he cast forth his unblinking gaze, his lidless eye ever searching the wide lands that he hungered to subdue. The most imposing feature of Barad-dûr was indeed the Black Tower itself. Immense and terrible, rising high into the ashen sky like a spear of shadow. Yet the eye of Sauron, so iconically depicted in the films of Peter Jackson as a flaming, lidless eye set atop the tower, was not described so in Tolkien's writings. In truth, no such physical eye crowned the tower's heights. Rather, the eye was a projection of the Dark Lord's gaze, a symbol of his malice and mastery, felt in the mind and seen only in visions and dreams. Indeed, Frodo beheld it not with mortal sight, but in the mind's eye when he sat upon the high seat of Amon Hen and there perceived its presence, roving the lands in its persistent search for the ring. Then at last his gaze was held, wall upon wall, battlement upon battlement, black, immeasurably strong, mountain of iron, gate of steel, tower of adamant. He saw it. Barad-dûr, fortress of Sauron. All hope left him. And suddenly he felt the eye. There was an eye in the dark tower that did not sleep. He knew that it had become aware of his gaze. A fierce, eager will was there. It leaped towards him. Almost like a finger he felt it, searching for him. Tolkien describes the eye as being not atop, but inside the tower. For Sauron had regained his physical form long before the days of the War of the Ring, and he dwelled now, brooding behind the walls of his fortress. And when Frodo at last passed into the realm of Mordor, he witnessed the gaze of the Dark Lord as he looked forth from some high window of the tower. And then he saw, rising black, blacker and darker than the vast shades amid which it stood, the cruel pinnacles and iron crown of the topmost tower of Barad-dûr. One moment only it stared out, but as from some great window immeasurably high there stabbed northward a flame of red, the flicker of a piercing eye, and then the shadows were furled again, and the terrible vision was removed. Based upon this quote, it is possible to discern that Sauron had fashioned for himself a chamber high within the tower of Barad-dûr, nigh unto its very pinnacle. And in that high tower there was a window, through which the Dark Lord cast his gaze across Middle-earth. And it was through that very window that Sauron beheld the host of the West, led by Aragorn, as it was arrayed before the Black Gate of Mordor. Thus the question arises, how could he have seen so far? Especially when the Carach Angren and the Black Gate itself stood between Barad-dûr and the host of the West. Some might assume that Sauron, being of the Order of the Ainur and mighty among the Maiar, may have been possessed of such vision that he was naturally able to see through stone and all other obstacles that stood in his path. Yet this notion seems doubtful, for even Manwë Sulimo, king of the Valar, was unable to behold visions of events that occurred beyond his physical line of sight. Accordingly, he raised his halls upon the heights of Taniquetil, that he might look forth beyond the great barrier of the Pelori, and watch over Middle-earth from that high seat. How then did Sauron, a lesser being than Manwë, behold the events of the Black Gate? The answer lies in the Dark Lord's possession of the Ithil Stone, one of the Palantiri of old, and it is likely that he kept it in that high chamber of his tower, and by its virtue was able to perceive things far beyond the reach of mortal vision. For the Palantiri permitted the user to behold distant places, regardless of intervening hills or valleys. No direct line of sight was required, for the stones looked by other means. Therefore the mountains posed no obstacle to Sauron's gaze. Yet the seeing stones were not without flaw, for the sight of the Palantiri could not pierce shadow. Where darkness reigned and the light was swallowed by the gloom, their vision faltered. This was a grievous hindrance, for the land of Mordor lay veiled in ever-mounting shadow. Far off the shadows of Sauron hung, but torn by some great gust of wind out of the world, or else moved by some great disquiet within. The mantling clouds swirled, and for a moment drew aside. It seems likely that what Frodo beheld in this quote was Sauron rending the veil of shadow that lay over Mordor, that he might wield the power of the Palantir and cast his gaze far across the lands to discern what events unfolded at the Black Gate. If this was the case, then it follows that the Ithil Stone was indeed kept in the highest chambers of the Dark Tower. From this we might summarise that those lofty halls served as a kind of sorcerous observatory, a watchful bastion where Sauron long abode, ever scheming, ever watching. Although by the fragments of lore left to us by Tolkien we can begin to build a picture of the inner workings of Barad-dûr, the true secrets of the Black Tower will remain ever veiled. For in his wisdom, Tolkien wrought Sauron not as a figure to be plainly seen, but as one shrouded in mystery, for therein lay the very marrow of his terror. In silence, his legend darkened and deepened, growing grim and immeasurable, like a storm lingering restlessly just beyond the horizon. Thus, we must accept that much of what transpired behind the blackened ramparts of Barad-dûr will rightfully remain forever a mystery. Thank you very much for tuning into Realms Unravelled. I would like to take this opportunity to light the beacons and call for aid. If you did enjoy this video, I would ask that you kindly click the like button below. Also, I would be very grateful if you would consider subscribing and clicking on the bell icon. And until next time, farewell fellow explorers of Middle-earth.